Okay, this video is a introduction to and a short discussion of the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So we're reading Frankenstein over a 2-week period because it's a full novel. It's a full, long novel. And so you have to plan accordingly with your time, right? So it's going to take 2 weeks to cover this novel, but I'm still asking you to read 78 pages in a week. So hopefully you've started early on this. I've made that suggestion over and over again earlier in the term. So please be prepared for that. So this is to give you some understanding about what the novel's about, to give you an idea. Like, again, like all these videos are meant to give you some traction in the reading. They're not meant to replace the reading because they don't give you enough information for that. But the way to have something in your mind so that when you're reading, you're like, oh, yeah, I recognize what I'm seeing now. Okay. So let's have a quick discussion of Mary Shelley's book. First of all, fun fact. In 1818, Mary Shelley wrote her novel when she was 19 years old. Okay, 19 years old. So that's what, a year out of high school for the way we think of time. So it's quite the achievement. She would be like a freshman in college when she wrote this. So the writing was part of an informal contest among friends to see who could write the best horror story. So she was hanging out with these other people. They were all older than her. One of them was a famous poet named Byron. It was like a dark and stormy night. Funny thing. And they all had this kind of contest who could do the best short horror story. They never finished their works, but she actually ended up finishing this novel, Frankenstein. This novel's another epistolary novel, like the Seraglio letters, a novel made of letters. This is a little different, though. It uses what's called a frame story. So it still has a set of letters. Maybe there's like, I forget, maybe 9 or 10 letters, but one of them is 99% of the novel, right? So that's the frame story. It's a story that holds the main story, right? So the main story is Frankenstein and his monster. The frame story is about this fellow named Robert Walton, who decides he wants adventure, and his choice of adventure is to go to the far north, to the northern ice, to take a ship with some men and go find out what's out there in the great far north, right? So that's the story. But actually, really, it's a story of Frankenstein. He tells the story because he learns of it from someone he meets on the ice. So keep this in mind as you think about Walton. Like, why does Shelley choose to use a frame story? I mean, she could literally just started telling Frankenstein's story, but no, she tells us Walton's story who tells us Frankenstein's story. And why is that? What is Walton supposed to tell us about Frankenstein? What is Walton's relationship to Frankenstein? Now, it's very important to remember when I say Frankenstein, I do not mean the monster. Victor Frankenstein is the scientist who made the creature, who brought life to the dead. The creature is called the creature. It has no name. It's Frankenstein's monster. Creature means a thing that was created. So the creatures were created by Frankenstein. So Frankenstein is his creator in the way God might be considered our creator if you were a Christian, right? So you got Victor, the scientist. You've got the creature. You've got Elizabeth. He's betrothed. That turns into, he's the woman he's supposed to marry. Henry, his best friend, and then Robert Walton, who's telling the story, who hears the story from Frankenstein. And that's how we get it, through Robert Walton, and why that matters, okay? So I want to say now, as you read the novel, you should take notes. Notice who the characters are and what they say and do, and keep track of that. A way to read a novel to get something out of it is to watch for what the characters do. And as you make notes, you can start seeing patterns appear. So take notes as you read. Don't just read and hope you'll remember or skim. Don't do any of that stuff. You're blowing if you do. All right. So Shelley's novel is many, many kinds of things, but one thing that is driven by is these two conflicting philosophical ideas: neoclassicism and romanticism. Now, these two worldviews are still alive today. Most people that you know, and maybe yourself, you hold to some of both of them, even though in some ways they're opposite. We agree with some of things and we agree with other things. So as I go through these two, you'll notice, oh yeah, I agree with that. And other times you're like, oh yeah, I agree with that. So they're still alive today, but they were born at this period. So neoclassicism comes directly out of the Enlightenment, which I'm pretty sure you've heard of from your history class. That's a period in European history. So neoclassicism is the aesthetic and cultural form of that Enlightenment thinking. Aesthetic means having to do with beauty. Aesthetics is the study of beauty. What counts as beauty? So neoclassicism is concerned with like aesthetics and cultural forms, like arts and books and decorations and things like that. That's neoclassical. Romanticism, on the other hand, is a reaction to the Enlightenment and neoclassic thinking. And by reaction, I mean opposite too. Where neoclassical Enlightenment thinking says one thing, Romanticism says the opposite. It's more than that, but it's at least that. Okay, so both of these views are alive in the novel and in the period that the novel has been written. So I want to take a look at those two so you can kind of absorb them. So neoclassicism, it's based on the word classical, as in that's a classic, and neo, which if you know from the Matrix means new, right? Neoclassicism means new classicism. So classicism itself is an appreciation of the old classics. So the idea of classics is this idea that there are these traditional ideas or beauty, forms of beauty that never change. So I know as I got older, I started buying clothes that had a classical look to them because I didn't want to have to buy clothes every year to fit fashions. Fashions change. A classical look stays the same year after year after year after year. So classicism is an appreciation of the classics. The idea that what's classic is more valuable than what's transitory or changes from year to year. Okay. The new part, like how can something traditional be also new, right? The thing about being neo or new is that it's a return to classical ideas. In other words, the classical beauty comes from ancient Greece and Rome. That was called classical period. And so this period where the neoclassicists are around, what they're saying is the best beauty was back then, and we're returning to that to bring it to the present and bringing it back again, which meant all these rules about what beauty looks like and things like that. So here's the things that were important about neoclassical thinking. First of all, they valued reason and they distrusted emotion. So they wanted their art to be very much about reason and rationality. So they used mathematics and things like that. And they distrusted emotions. They thought people should have a grip on their emotions. Emotions were a problem, right? And this makes sense because it was just after the religious wars where emotions were a problem. They valued order and feared chaos, right? So for instance, to a neoclassicist, the natural place for a person to live is the city. That the dangerous place for people to be is the nature, right? Out in the mountains and things like that. That's chaos. Nature is chaos. City is ordered streets, square. Think about Center City, it's all grid-like, it's order. The neoclassicists respected decorum, due duty, and propriety. That means doing the right thing when you're supposed to do it, like manners, right? They did not like despair and people whining about injustice. They did not like that at all. They thought that was just crybaby stuff. That really you should like stiff upper lip, be very controlled, know what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, do your duty when you're supposed to do it, and it's not about yourself. It's about more than you. All right. So they saw ancient Greece and Rome as the high points of human achievement. It's been downhill ever since to them. They also saw the universe as a perfect mechanism, like a clock ticking away, that it's perfect and it's ticking away year after year, day after day, second after second. That was the universe. So the world only seems to have problems. So we look at the world like, oh my God, all these problems. What the neoclassicist says is the world doesn't have any problems. The problem is you are so limited, you are unable to understand the bigger picture. If you knew the bigger picture, you'd understand everything is working perfectly well. So think about it. All the problems we see in society today, like political problems, race problems, gender problems, to the neoclassicists, like you're just too small. You're not smart enough to realize it's a bigger view than that. Maybe it's the God's eye view. It means everything's just like it's supposed to be because the universe is perfect as it is. Very difficult to swallow as a modernist, so you probably reject that. Okay. But you notice it's very much about order, propriety, manners, doing the right thing at the right time, classical beauty, reason and order, not emotions and not chaos. Now, let's look at Romanticism a second. So Romanticism started around the late 18th century, so late 1700s. It didn't really prefer classical art; it liked popular art. So instead of like say classical music, they would like rock and roll or hip hop. They would like popular stuff. They loved Shakespeare because Shakespeare did not follow the rules. He had his own style, chaotic style. So classicists didn't really understand Shakespeare very well. Romanticists love strong emotions much more than reason. They want passionate emotions. They think their art should have passionate feeling. They also value the unique individual self over some ideal type. So there's this ideal type of a person where, like, what's a perfect version of a man or what's a perfect version of a woman? That's an ideal type. That's what they looked for. and everybody's uniquely different, that's just less than the ideal type. To the romantics, though, every individual type was great for being individual. So they valued nature over city and urban life. Like they thought people naturally belonged in the nature, not in cities. The cities were bad for people. So they thought we should be out in the woods. Now it's important to recognize this that it used to be before the romantics that people looked at mountains, they said, oh my God, those are frightening. With the romantics came the invention of things like mountain climbing, where people went and said, let's go into the mountains. Before, they thought mountains were dangerous and you shouldn't go there. With the romantics, they said, oh no, nature's wonderful. We should go out there and we should be in nature. That's romantic. So the romantics have valued imagination over reason, right? They thought imagination, creativity was more important than reasoning by far. So they emphasized the image of the artist. And then finally, they had a huge interest in the idea of the sublime. Sublime is a feeling that's like a mixture of awe and terror. So the only thing I could say is if you'd ever been to like the Grand Canyon, like actually standing at the Grand Canyon, it's a huge, huge canyon. It makes you feel so small and insignificant, but it's terrifying actually. But it's so huge and beautiful at the same time. So it's beauty and awe and terror at your own insignificance. That's the sublime. They were way into that kind of thing. And you could get that experience by going into the mountains, for instance. So you can hear they're very different, these two things. You should keep these ideas in mind as you read the novel. You're going to see in the novel, Shelley talks about enlightenment and neoclassical ideas. And also you'll see these strong emotions throughout the novel. Watch for those things. Take notes about them because they really do matter for how to appreciate this novel. All right, so that's all I got. Remember, take a lot of notes while you read. I have a PDF of this in our course so that you can see these same notes again without having to watch the video.